and then found themselves trafficked to Ghana. There are a lot of questions that people had, so we put our special correspondent in charge of investigative journalism on the case, and he did an initial report. So first, let's take a look at the report that lays out the background of this story. We also have a guest joining us. Dennis Amakri is with us as well, but this report will catch you up to speed if you're just joining us on what has been a very big breaking news for us here in News Central and across Lagos as well. Let's take the report.
We arrive at Kota Resettlement Estate in Lagos State, where Mrs. Rosemary Nenna Duriji was waiting to speak to us about the disappearance of her son Daniel Duriji, who's been missing for over 3 weeks.
How are you, madam? I'm fine, sir.
Mrs. Duriji, a petty trader who deals in second-hand clothing in Ikota, says her son Daniel and his friend Zeal left with a stranger who had promised to land them acting roles in a movie under production. Daniel and Zeal were to return that evening. 3 weeks after that day, they both are still missing.
This is where you stay, right?
Yes, sir. This was
With your son?
Yes, sir.
How many of you live in this apartment?
4 of my children and myself,
So,
making 5.
Was he taken from this apartment?
Actually, I was outside doing some things in my business. One of his friends came. He told him that they are going out to go and art film. Not to know that this is the word that the man that want to take them to Ghana, that put in their mind that they should deceive the parents, not to tell the parents the truth where they are going. My son did not tell me where he's going. He deceived me, telling me that he want to go. They are going to where they are shooting film. If you know what happened, they are telling us that they are right now in Ghana. I said Ghana. Not to know that the man that took them to Ghana have already made arrangement and tell them what they will tell the parents, how they will deceive the parents, that they should not tell the parents truth where they are going to. That's how we see everything. Since 3 weeks till now, we keep on looking for these children. Before you know what happened, my son keep on showing his picture at Instagram, telling us that they are at Ghana and they are crying and telling us that we should help them out where they are. That where they are, that place is not suiting them. They are not feeling comfortable. And these people keep on maltreating them. The one that makes us angry is that they keep on beating them. My children is crying. To the extent that they kick my son and my son fainted. And on the ground, on the floor where he fainted, they keep on beating him. Beating him. In fact, I don't know what I will do. I don't know what to say.
Daniel's elder sister, Miracle, says she misses her brother and wishes he is found and returned in one piece.
The day they got missing, that night, we could call them on normal call. But the next day in the morning, normal call wasn't going again. It was
And they've been sending you messages?
Yes, first message is when he started communicating with me directly. He said, "Omo Miracle, make una help us, so we go die here." That they were beating them back to back. They even beat him up till he fainted. No, they don't give them food that satisfies them.
I decided to pay a visit to Mrs. Camelia Ulumma Ndoaguibi, Zill's mother, to find out her own story.
Her son and your son are missing.
Yes.
So how did it happen? What happened?
Okay, on that fateful day, that was 2 weeks ago. Tomorrow, Friday, make it 3 weeks. Then I was by this, let's say around after 10, I was telling mommy that they said they has a job
10 o'clock in the night?
In the morning, 10 a.m. in the morning, that the agent said they should come around 12. I said, okay, you're getting a job. We said at Lekki Plaza or Lekki Pizza. I said, okay. Before you go to that place, I want to give me the number of the agent. Have you paid the agent? He said, yes, I've paid 3,000 naira. I said, okay. Now, give me, yes, I don't have phone. Give me the agent's number, give me the agent's phone, and write the place you are going to so that I will know in case anything happens. So this is how we are start running up and down. Since that very day till now.
Having reported the case of their missing children at the Alagbon police station in Lagos State, these two women continue to plead to the authorities to do all they can and ensure the safe return of Daniel and Zeal, who are both believed to be held against their will somewhere in Ghana by some individuals whose motives are still unclear.
All I need from the government that they should help me and rescue my son out.
Help me, I'm a widow. It's only him I have as a son. They should please help us.
Nobody is balanced, everybody is thinking here and there. I'm even supposed to go to school, but the whole situation is just turning everybody around.
Recently, there have been reports of increasing cases of abduction within these areas by individuals who pose as recruitment agents with promises of lucrative jobs only to have their unsuspecting victims sold into some kind of modern-day slavery, where they are subjected to all kinds of inhuman treatment while serving their masters or madams, mostly in neighboring West African countries. These victims sometimes end up in forced prostitution, harsh domestic labor, and fraud. In rare cases, some of these victims make it back home, sometimes through government interventions, and sometimes they are never seen again by their families. For News Central, Marshall Anthony Onoya.
But in this situation, we've been able to have a rescue mission. Now, before we get into more details, well, let me share the details with you before I bring in the guest. This afternoon, our special correspondent on investigative journalism, Marshall, was in Accra, Ghana. We have been in touch with the Ghanaian police. They've been very receptive, and he was in Ghana yesterday. Today, after a briefing just about an hour or so ago, there was a mission to rescue these two young boys, or these two young men, as it would be. And they were rescued along with, I believe, 3 others. And as well, I can also update you now, information coming in from Marshall that 2 culprits have been arrested. Let me bring in the guest we have with us. We have Dennis Amakri. He's former assistant director of the DSS. And of course, I do believe we'll be having another guest join us. But Mr. Amakri, one of the reasons we played that video or the package was to catch you and many others up on this story that's now a breaking story and developing for us here at News Central. But it's also something that is no longer unheard of. The issues of trafficking, particularly for young people across the African continent, are one of the issues that have grown in recent years. And now this is just trafficking from Lagos across the border to Accra, Ghana. But I want to start with what seemed to have been maybe a lackadaisical response from the Nigerian police here in Lagos, and then the response we got when we got in touch with the Ghanaian police just about 2 or 3 days ago before we flew our correspondent to Accra. Is it fair to compare the 2 responses and then to see how things have played out, knowing that, of course, this is a cross-border operations that involves a lot of diplomatic conversations and possibly red tape and bureaucracy? Mr. Amakri.
Thank you very much. This is a very, very interesting case. And I think that there are a lot of things to be done, concerning it, because when you look at what actually happened, that is the basic issue that your reporter was pursuing, which is this illegal trafficking of persons. So it is not a kidnap case per se. It's not a kidnap case per se. It is illegal trafficking, sometimes with the consent of the victim, which just happened. And they went in there, and because when you look at it again, they were using them to commit fraud all over the world. And then, of course, they also have the access to send messages to their families in Lagos. I think either the police was not very serious about it, they would have gone higher, to report this particular case. The Commissioner of Police is there, and then, of course, pursue it more seriously, because you don't want to know, we want to know how the police are going to place it. Is it a voluntary people looking for job outside, or it is a kidnap case? This is the shady area that I think your investigator should go ahead and really dig more into it, because there's more, that meets the eye.
And as you say, that's quite true. He right now is with the Ghanaian police, so there's going to be much more coming on this story later today. We're also looking to touch base with the families as well to find out how they're feeling, to know that Daniel and Zeal are coming home. But a second guest that we have joining us right now is Thamsanqa Zhu. He's African Affairs Analyst based in Ghana. This was what they would call serendipity, because he was meant to be part of the conversation today, but this conversation took over. Thamsanqa, thank you so much for joining us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
All right. I want to ask, how much of an issue is trafficking in Ghana? We know the stories that we hear here in Nigeria. Even just recently, a very big story coming from Delta State. In I think September of this year, over about 100 boys who were found to have been somehow either lured or trafficked to an area of Delta State and then locked in, forced to do this Yahoo or fraud, online fraud as we know it. But it's really quite strange for some people to hear young Nigerians traffic across the border to Ghana. So I'd like to know, what is the situation in Ghana? How big of an issue has trafficking become, or is it still just something that might be spilling over from Nigeria?
Right. So it was difficult for me to hear you. But if you're asking about the significance of the appointment vis-a-vis how it relates to Ghana and how it relates to Nigeria in particular, you have to go back probably to the days where people like Chief Amiyek were in charge. I do remember that time very well, when there was the CHOGM in Harare in Zimbabwe in 1991, when, just after he had taken over. And, a lot of things that people wanted, and the voice of the African people was one that a lot of people, found a home with. He was able to solve so many things. And one of the things that drives, let's say, the Commonwealth in particular is, the idea of the Harare Declaration. And this is probably what you might see happening now.
Very interesting. Mr. Makri, I'm coming back to you. So I don't know if you caught the breaking news when we had it, but we have some visuals of our special correspondent on investigative journalism walking through the house. The house was a very nondescript house in what seems to be a quiet neighborhood or a suburb of Accra. He was walking through and took us through, and I hope we'll get those visuals soon, and took us through the house where the young men were kept, also into the house of the person known as Chairman, who seemed to have been running the operation. He was found with several phones as well as drugs in his room as well. Then we also saw a machete and what looked to be a cleaver. Yes, that's what I'm looking for, a meat cleaver, and that the boys were often subjected to levels of torture. You heard one of the mothers talk about the fact that her son told his sister that he was beaten so much that he fainted or he fell to the ground. There's a lot of violence used to keep these young men in line. And so when you talk about maybe a willing victim and then the situation changes and you find out that the picture that was painted for you is not the picture you find, where do you think the law can come in on this aspect of things? Because they told their moms they were going because they wanted to act. They now find themselves trafficked across the border into Ghana, violently oppressed, starved, unable to take their baths, limited with the water they're able to drink, and they're basically kept prisoner. Are we looking at victims here?
Well, I think we're looking either as we're looking at people who are victims or people who are having some kind of Stockholm syndrome, who have, because they've been doing some kind of Yahoo business whereby they must be getting money. And apparently the boys might have also been having some kind of share. I don't know where the punishment side of it comes in, whereby they'll be beating them. Are they beating them to look for more customers, or I don't understand. That's why I said that, the investigative journalists there will, after you get the boys, I think there should be a serious briefing, because we need to know exactly under which circumstances, and have they been restricted into that house? Can they go out and come in? How come they have communication gadgets to either make WhatsApp calls, or even they have a computer in front of them? Can they make, reach out to some kind of law enforcement? And of course, the interesting part is where we have the Ghanaian police coming. That means that whole operation was illegal. And the Ghanaian police have to come in to bust what they are doing there. But I think there is more. Like I said, there is more, to be investigated on this particular matter.
Well, I can provide some answers for you. So a marshal who was on the scene said that, in fact, the house was actually under lock and key. The young men were locked in and unable to leave. And in terms of communication, because I know that's been a question that many have asked, they knew their sister's password into her social media account. So they would log in and communicates with their sister via DM on her own account. But let me bring in Abu Abakar Ba. He's a presidential research professor of sociology in Northern Illinois University in the United States. Mr. Ba, thank you so much for joining us on this very big developing story now. We've talked about the issue around trafficking, and it's becoming much more of a big conversation. Even earlier today on my show, we talked about irregular migration and the impact and the risk for many people across the continent. But when you see Nigeria, which unfortunately has a rather negative reputation when it comes to the issue of trafficking, many of us don't think of Ghana. So these young men were reportedly trafficked from Lagos here in Nigeria to Accra, Ghana. What's the connection? What do you think the connection may be? Is it a sub-Saharan Africa connection? Is it a West African connection? Why are we also seeing a rise in trafficking here on the continent as well?
Well, thank you very much for having me. So I think, the issue of trafficking, I know we often think of it mostly in North-South terms, but there's actually a long history of trafficking also within regions within West Africa in slightly different contexts. But, there was actually a lot of trafficking of children during the civil wars in West Africa, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, and so forth. So I think we have to think of actually human trafficking not just through a global North-South lens, but also through the regional lens. So I think in this case, it seems that we're talking here of criminal networks, perhaps mostly involved in the cyber crimes. I'm not actually sure of the entire story at this point. But if it is part of cyber criminal kind of networks, again, you have to consider, I guess, some of the hubs or some of the areas in the world where you do have significant operations of cyber criminals. And I know a lot of cities have actually come under scrutiny or the spotlight. So I wouldn't be surprised, if there is some kind of operation from Accra or from Ghana, and to see that kind of trafficking.
I like the fact that you bring in this conversation around criminal networks and this criminal fraud. Mr. Amakri, I'm coming back to you. We might believe that 419 and Yahoo online fraud, they wear a black face. It tends to wear an African face, and sometimes it wears a Nigerian face. Even if we're not in the top 5 or the top 10 of the countries that are responsible for this, it's the face it wears. Are we doing enough to sort of change that narrative? And then are we also educating young people enough? There's this Japa wave, we see it often, but that desperation to leave the country with so many issues often can lead people to falling into the hands of unscrupulous agents, criminal entities, as what we've seen in this situation, even as the conversation I had this morning on my show. Are we doing enough with education? Are we doing enough with tracking and making sure that those who are actually overseeing these operations are also brought to book? It's easy to arrest young men, it's easy to arrest 1 or 2 soldiers, but who are the people really at the top of these criminal networks that are bringing young men and young women in some instances inside to these criminal doings?
Yeah, well, when you look at it, the Yahoo criminal gangs who are mainly into cyber crimes being, I think the Office of the National Security Advisor in Nigeria is very, very much into it. Whereby they are trying to either go into education, sometimes trying to de-radicalize them, so to say, turn them around for better uses, or make them legal hackers and stuff like that. But I know that the face of cyber criminals, especially the emotional crime that has been going on, even in the United States here, have gone down a lot, because a lot of people see Nigerians as, yes, these are the people that are doing this kind of cyber crimes. But of course, it's going down seriously now, because they've come to see that there are other Nigerians that are into other things, more lucrative and more professional. And of course, this particular set of criminals, I think, are becoming very, very minimal. But I think the National Security Advisor's Office is trying to get into it, whereby we have to intensify tracking, and at the same time, of course, for those people that have been caught, try to, because these guys are talented. Yeah. They are talented. And I would suggest that government should actually try to harvest these ideas and then turn them around for better use for national security.
I'm not sure how many people might agree with you, Mr. Macri, on that, especially given the fact that they defraud people of their money. But that's, I think, might be a conversation for another situation. Mr. Zhao, I want to come back to you very quickly. We can talk about the impact of Yahoo, what we call it here in Nigeria, online fraud. But I'd like to hear from your perspective, how big of an issue is online fraud, or is this kind of setup in Ghana?
I think that's for the guy in Ghana.
Yes, I think he was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just about to hear you. Sorry about that. You were very faint. Yeah, so come again, please.
So I was asking whether or not online fraud is a very, very big issue in Ghana.
Well, it is, as much as it is of international concern, because as you would appreciate, the borders, there are no borders when you talk about online, anything that can transcend online. So the people can be based anywhere. There are all those legal requirements for people, Interpol included, ECOWAS, and security forces within the region in general, to be on the same standards, to communicate with one another, so that if there's something that's happening in Nigeria, across the border in Ghana, that situation can be settled as well. So I would say there is, it really doesn't matter what the levels are. The concern, the instruments that are put in place are the same. The responsibility that the security services or the police have is the same as any other country. Because one might think Nigeria has a problem, but maybe some can look at the legislation that is happening, that is available in Ghana or any other neighboring countries as a weak point. So for me, the question when it comes to crimes of this nature that are probably cross-border is basically to combine forces, and they do meet from time to time. So the standards, I would say, are quite high to be able to assist and tackle these problems. Back to you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. My time is fast spent, but Mr. Macri and Professor Abu Bakar Bar, please do hold on. We are going into News Central now, and there'll be more updates and more conversations on this story. It is a developing story for us here in Lagos, even though it is cross-border happening in Accra. But we're very happy to report that 2 young men will be returning to their families. 2 culprits have been arrested, and our investigative journalist is still on the ground in Accra and will be giving us all the latest updates. And we will also be speaking with the families. This is News Central. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun.